Our next speaker is Sharon Davies. Sharon is a professor of law at Ohio State Law School, and she directs the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State. She has a wealth of experience that she brings to this topic, but I have to tell you, one of the things that I found most interesting when I was in New York City working on this was the extent to which, and Sharon brings this experience, the extent to which people in prosecutors' offices and will be the first people who will say to you, this is not working. My docket, my courtroom is completely filled with cases that don't belong in a criminal justice system. So you have some of the biggest supporters of change coming from a place that you really might not expect it. Sharon is going to address the topic, which is a very important topic, of implicit bias.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be with you all this morning, and I've paid some attention to the questions that have been asked so far, and they do tie into some of the things that I want to talk to you all about this afternoon. Now, I am, as the director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State, I am a part of an engaged research institute that has decided to act as a bridge of sorts between the academy, the research that has been going on within universities, particularly social and cognitive psychology departments, and also by neurologists that have studied the brain and the way in which the brain operates and the implications of that for what you all have been talking about today and thinking about today when it comes to school safety and in particular school discipline procedures. We made a decision at the Kirwan Institute last year, this time, to issue the first State of the Science Implicit Bias Review. And you all have been given the first pages of this review. It's actually 104 pages long, and you can find it on our website. You'll find interesting, in particular, one chapter of it that is specifically addressed to the education realm. Implicit bias, the term that has been mentioned by a number of people already today, is an important subject of scientific inquiry. And one of the ways in which we get through resistance by teachers to changing school discipline procedures is by educating them, raising awareness within the, teachers and administrators, school districts, to know more about this science, because once you are exposed to it, it opens people up and it reduces resistance to changing school discipline rules in fairly dramatic ways. And I will say to you that that is true not just for folks who are professionals in education. It is true for groups of judges. It is true for groups of lawyers. It is true for physicians. It is true for police officers, because implicit bias impacts every one of us. It is not relegated to, its relevance is not relegated to a particular area of social life. Now, they're trying to pull up some slides here, which if we can get them, it'll give you an idea of how it is that we at the Kirwan Institute go about diffusing defensiveness that often crops up when the subject of race is on the table and people are being asked to accept that race is having an influence on the decisions that they are making. Now, that is a very difficult idea, oftentimes heard by people as an accusation, and probably one of the most serious accusations that we can level at each other today. So a big part of introducing people to implicit bias science is to reduce their defensiveness. And the only way to do that is to show that this is an issue for every single person, irrespective of race, and that it is a part of the cognitive processes of the human brain, which is hardwired to operate in a particular way that we are talking about here. So this is very different from a conventional understanding of racism. So when people like a group of teachers are told that the decisions that they're making in a classroom to send a kid out of the classroom is influenced in some way by implicit bias, it is the normal tendency to hear that as an accusation of old-fashioned, conventional racism. And so it's not at all surprising why there would be an enormous amount of resistance, pushback, and defensiveness about that kind of accusation. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the way in which the brain functions that is way out ahead of us in most moments of our lives, in ways that it is operating so quickly that we are unaware of it. It is effortless to the human being involved, and because of those things, it is very possible that they will. This is good. They will miss it. They won't even realize it has happened. So thank you. Okay, we'll just hold on this. So some of you may be familiar with a book by Daniel Kahneman, who is this world prize-winning, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who's written this brilliant book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in this book, Daniel Kahneman is able to explain to laypersons how the human brain operates in two very different ways. One is very fast, and the other is quite slow. He labels these by calling one systems 1 thinking and the other systems 2 thinking. Systems 1 thinking, he explains, is that part of the brain that operates with lightning speed. It is triggered very quickly. It is able to process things without any sensation of effort or work on our part. And its core function is associative memory. The way that it's able to work so quickly is because it is the part of the brain that associates one object with another object or another term or characteristic. Associative thinking, that systems 1 thinking. The other part of the brain, according to Daniel Kahneman, which he calls systems 2 thinking, is that part of our thinking that is methodical and disciplined and orderly and is work. It is the part of our cognitive function that we bring to bear on our most serious work. So teachers, administrators are going to tend to think of themselves as more systems 2 thinkers than systems 1 thinkers. But the truth is that our brain is way out ahead of us more than we have any sense of. And to show you that, I'm going to walk you through a couple of exercises here. you're going to need to be able to see this screen. So the folks in the back, if you can't see it, it's going to interfere with your ability to really get what I'm about to take you through, a series of exercises. But all of these are designed to give you the sensation of what Daniel Kahneman is talking about when it comes to Systems 1 and Systems 2 thinking. So core associative memory, that's the ability to associate one object with another thing without any effort. The next slide is designed to show us that when we fill in this blank here, lime green, lemon yellow, sky, blue, all of you come up with blue very easily. And you were way out ahead of me. I can't even read them as fast as you filled in that blank. And if you think about that all of you did that without any consultation with each other, and also in an instant without any sensation of effort, that is what Daniel Kahneman is talking about, is that part of the brain that works with lightning speed. And what is it that we can take away from the fact that all of you filled in the blank with the same characteristic? That means that sky is, in the human brain, strongly associated with the word blue, at least when there's this particular pattern on the screen. Now, some of you may be thinking that, well, the reason why you all got it so quickly was because I showed you a pattern. And what if I didn't show you a pattern at all? Let's look at that on the next screen, and please fill in the blanks. Night in, black in, young end. Same thing, no pattern there. Every one of you were able to get it without any sensation of effort, and instantly in providing the same object, the same pairing here. That means the pairing of young and old, black and white, night and day are very strong in the human brain, the adult human brain, at least by this point of your lives. So that is an example of associative thinking, and we do it automatically when we don't even know that we are doing it. Now, not all of our thinking is based on such. This might seem very logical and orderly list. Sometimes we don't realize that not only is our associative memory in play, but it was actually able to do remarkable things. It can actually reorder things to make sense of the world to us, because we're able to associate things so quickly and easily with each other. And to get a sense of this, the next slide is I'm going to ask one person in the front, could you help me with this? On the next slide, I'm going to ask you, to just read out as best you can what you see on the next slide. Read it out loud.
I cannot believe that I actually understand what I was reading.
Okay, so I don't know this gentleman sitting in the front, and that wasn't at all staged. But if you take a look at this sentence, you can see how badly misspelled. This would get an F in the teacher's world. This is a badly misspelled sentence, and in fact, the only two words that are spelled correctly is I and was. Yet, the gentleman in the front row was able to read it out loud without difficulty. Now, maybe that's just because I got lucky and picked a very smart guy in the room, and I'm sure that's true. But let's see if the rest of you can figure out what the next slide says and together now. So, amazing. Now that's how quickly the mind works, and I just want you to ask yourself, as you were reading through this totally messed up paragraph here, whether it was really effortful on your behalf. This explains in the midst of it why it is not effortful, that the human brain can do this so easily. By this point, you are such skilled readers that you're not reading. We think that we're reading in an orderly way from left to right and everything has to be spelled properly. That turns out not to be the case at all. This is also, by the way, one of the reasons why you have to slow yourself down and read out loud sometimes to catch your own proofing errors, because the brain will see it in the way in which it is able to see it, which is it rearranges things with lightning speed so that you can make sense of the world before you. So that's an example of systems one thinking. Let's go to the next slide. Now this is an example of systems two thinking. It's actually an example of both simultaneously, because those of you who saw it pop on the screen would recognize it immediately as a math problem, a multiplication problem, and you would know immediately by this point in your lives that it's capable of being solved. But in order to solve it, you would actually have to activate or engage your systems two thinking, and that would require some effort on your part, some level of attention that you don't have to put to systems one thinking. And you don't always realize that when you're doing this, and it's systems two thinking that you have engaged, that there are physiological things that are going on in your body as well. Your eyes are slightly more dilated, your pupils aren't dilated, your heart rate goes up, and your blood pressure goes up a bit as well, and it doesn't come down. And your pupils don't go back to normal until you've actually solved the problem, or you didn't try to begin with. You didn't engage in it. Anybody know what the answer to this is? 403? Well, anyway. 458. 458? All right. Well, the point is about systems two thinking is that we can engage it and we need to rely on it all the time, every day. We need to apply it to a lot of our social tasks, and as social beings, we know that systems two attention is so important in some moments that we actually do certain things to enable other people to be attentive when they need to be. So, for example, if any of you have young children in the house who you help to learn to drive, you would unconsciously go quiet when your young driver was trying to pass an 18-wheeler on the highway, for example, knowing intuitively that it takes more attention to navigate around a truck than maybe some other vehicles or obstacles. And so systems two thinking is very important. What we don't always realize is that when it is engaged, that how much those focusing mechanisms that are so critical are preventing us from seeing other things. But let me take you through a few more exercises. Let me just ask you guys to read out loud these words that you see up on the screen together, very quickly. Very easy for you. You could have you read it even quicker than you could say it out loud. And so not a hard task at all. On the next slide, I'm going to ask you, instead of reading words, is to call out the colors that you see. And when you do that, let me just give you the different screens and projectors show these colors slightly differently. So sometimes the blue looks like purple, but just call it blue for sake of convenience. All right, here we go. Okay, easily could do it, but a little bit harder. You could see how it took a little more to do this than it is to read those words, and to just underscore this. I want you to do, on the next slide, I want you to call out the colors, so ignore the words and call out the colors of the words that you see. Okay, everybody got that? Ignore the words, call out the colors of the words that you see. Okay, here we go. Okay, not only was that harder than the slide before it, but did you see yourself making mistakes? How in the world, why is it that we would make mistakes? Now, in the last slide, you didn't make mistakes. You were actually able to call out those colors. What's happening on this slide that is making us make mistakes when we try to call out the colors rather than reading the words? The process of, by this point of your life, of reading words is so fast, lightning fast. As you recall, you could even rearrange letters in a word, that it is way out ahead of you. You don't even realize how far the brain is on this kind of function ahead of you until you try to actually ignore words and call out the colors instead. So what your brain is doing there when it is working on those words is unintentional. And in fact, if you think about it, your intention for this slide was to call out the words and not read the letters. So what your brain is doing is unintentional and also lightning fast and something that feels effortless for you to do. So the thing to remember is that is the hard wiring of cognitive processing that we are talking about when we are talking about associative one thinking and how fast the brain is doing things, even things that you are not intending to do. So just remember that. We're not giving our brain permission with this slide to read the words. It's doing it on its own. So I think maybe we have one more slide.
We're going to be able to make this one work.
Okay, so this slide, how does it connect up to race and school discipline? We're going to try to get this. This is a great slide if we can get it, but sometimes it's difficult to do. It might be. Do we have audio?
Telling us we need to update our browser.
Yeah. I don't think so. All right,
Yeah, I
well,
don't think it's
let's
gonna-
just go back to this. Oh, it is. Maybe we'll be able to get this. It's working on it. Yeah, systems two at work. Okay, so if it does seem like it's going to work, I'm going to stop it. Okay, and I'll set it up for you too, because I have to give you a little bit of a clue about what we're going to do with this slide in advance. But so how does it connect up to race? Well, our brains, we have seen for ourselves, are hardwired to operate very, very quickly without our realizing a lot of times that they're doing it. Our brains are hardwired to associate objects with each other. And so that is the mechanism at play when categories of gender are at play, or disability, or race, ethnicity, age, any kind of category that we automatically fit people into. One of the first things that a brain does when we meet another person is we categorize them into different slots. And all of the associative ideas or meanings that those categories have for us are immediately automatically triggered without any sense of awareness, often unconsciously. So we have to be concerned about the kinds of meanings that race, gender, age has for our thinking, because we may not even realize that they are affecting our thinking at all. And so I'm going to try to, we're going to try to do this awareness test, if it works. I'm going to ask you to hold it. Okay, yeah. The object of this one is, don't let it go yet. The object of this one is to count the number of passes the men in the white are going to do. Now, both teams, there's one team in white, one team in black, both teams have a basketball, and the task is to focus on how many passes the men in white make to each other. So if this can actually go.
Seems to go for about 10 seconds. And then
yeah, it may not be possible to do this one. Well, maybe we need it to get out a little bit ahead of us so that
How many passes does the team in white make?
yeah, we're gonna. Sorry.
keep on.
Yeah, we can't. We can't do this.
It'll be easy to tell how many because it'll come like every.
Yeah, that's not fair. All right. Well, we can.
We could just close this if you want.
Yeah, let's close that, and I'll talk about the IAT. So anyway, I mean, you now have the grounding to understand why it is that researchers, decades ago now, started to look very closely at whether we have certain meanings that are triggered in connection with race. And the most famous of all of the tests that have been devised is the implicit association test. How many of you are familiar with the implicit association test? Okay, not that many. So this is a test that was devised by professors at Harvard. If you want to take one of these tests, you can take it online. It's called Project Implicit. Just put in IAT, you'll find it very easily. Millions of these tests have been taken online since the test was evolved. And there are many different categories that you can test yourselves on. Some of them have to do with race, gender, disability, and so on. And essentially, the idea behind the implicit association test is it's a response time test. It is testing how quickly we can pair objects with each other. And the theory is that we're able to pair objects with each other with certain terms or certain concepts more quickly if they are closely associated with each other. So when you guys did the pairing of objects in the initial screens, that was simple to you. And an IAT would say that the reason for that is because those pairs are strongly associated in your minds. And so too, we wanted to determine whether concepts were closely associated with race as well. You can see this is one of the slides that would pop up in the IAT for race, and so the instruction to the individual would be to as quickly as they could hit one key or the other key to pair the picture that pops up with certain terms. And so in this one, the task would be to associate this person, this image looks like an African-American face, with the concept of good. And it would test how quickly the person could do that. In another set part of the test, it would be to connect this image of an African-American with the concept, or a white American, whichever it pops up, with the concept of good or bad. And so what millions of these tests that have been taken now show is that there's a strong correlation between and faster ability to pair white images with good or positive sounding words. And conversely, it takes longer to pair black faces with good or positive words. And so and it's much quicker to associate black faces with bad words, much slower to associate white faces with bad words. And so this is terribly important, and some very good evidence that things are going on in our brains that are inconsistent with our strong feelings of egalitarianism. And this was not the only kind of test that our scientists have created to study this phenomenon. There are neurological tests, there are tests with formal magnetic resonance imaging, for example, that have studied brain activity when participants are given pictures of unfamiliar white faces, unfamiliar black faces, to determine what's going on in the brain. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that reacts to threats and fear. And these studies have shown that when participants are shown pictures of unfamiliar black faces, the same part of the brain that records fear or threat are firing off when they see these kinds of images as compared to when they see unfamiliar white faces. There is a study that shows that the same amount of amygdala activity is seen when people are shown pictures of black male faces and snakes. Now, that all happens automatically. It's triggered in the brain. This is what people really need to know when they start to think about those discrepancies in student discipline scenarios, that there may easily be things that are going on in the minds of teachers and administrators, but teachers most often inside the classrooms who are making very quick decisions about what needs to be done about a particular student that may show some reasoning that one person's misbehavior in the classroom is more threatening, is more disruptive or disrespectful than another student's. And so this is why what Judith was saying about the subjective part of student discipline rules that we have to be very, very concerned about. Now, there are all kinds, I don't have much time, I think, left to go through a lot of the studies, but there have been decades now of studies that you can read in the State of the Science Review that implicate all kinds of decisions, basically any discretionary decision that we might think about, where there are people of different races or different genders involved. The same kinds of tests show that we have strong associations between females and nurturing, but not between females and leadership. We have strong associations between males and leadership, and not strong relationships between males and nurturing. There are lots of implications of these tests, and I encourage you all to take the IAT. There are things that we can do. People, when they learn about implicit bias, say first a lot of times that, well, if this is unconscious and we're not aware of it even happening, what can we do about it? If this is our brain being out ahead of us, is there anything that can be done? The things that can be done are realizing that this exists, that it is real, that it applies to all of us. Black people who take the IAT also have strong pairings between blackness and more negative terms than whiteness and negative terms. So this is an issue for everyone. It's also a partial explanation for what's going on in that famous Kenneth Clark doll test. You all remember this doll test where young black children were very young, were given two dolls, and one black, one white, and asked a series of questions about it. Which is the good doll? Which is the bad doll? Why is that the good doll? Why is that the bad doll? And child after child after child held up the black doll as the bad doll and explained it was bad because it was black. It was good because it was white. The famous doll test that's been redone, by the way, very recently to show the same kinds of responses. The only way we can understand that is to understand that this is not examples of old-fashioned racism. This is how powerful the associations between race and certain meanings are in the human brain from a very, very early age, affecting all of us across racial boundaries. That's why we need to know about it. That's why all teachers in particular need to know about it, and why school systems have to put in safeguards to protect us and to make us be able to align our beliefs and our egalitarian commitments with what's actually going on in the human mind without our awareness. So we need to get rid of zero tolerance policies because particularly zero tolerance policies that are operating on categories like disruptive behavior or disrespectful behavior, disobedient behavior in the classroom. You can have zero tolerance when it comes to things like possession of weapons or possession of drugs, or actual violence. But when you have a teacher who is interpreting how threatening a student's or disruptive or disrespectful a student's behavior is, that teacher needs to know that race has a role even if they don't realize it has been triggered. It's triggered automatically. The brain is way out ahead. So getting rid of zero tolerance subjectivity is one thing. But in fact, we should know that our rules about student discipline should really lean in the direction of keeping kids in school where they are much safer and much less likely to become involved in the criminal justice system than if they're pushed outside of the safety of the school building. So if suspensions need to be made, it is wise to think about in-school suspensions or other kinds of alternatives that have already been talked about today as ways of addressing the very real reality that implicit bias is playing a role in some of these suspension and expulsion gaps. Some of you will have seen that the Department of Education, I think just this week or last, came out with a summary of findings, some of which said that these suspensions and expulsions are being made on very young children, in some cases preschool age children, and that although black students represent only 18% of preschool enrollments, they are 42% to have been suspended once, and 48% of preschool students suspended more than once. Preschool suspensions. Now, I think that we can do better than that, and the way in which we can go about that is by learning more about the reality of implicit bias. I will tell you that Kirwan is about to come out with its second annual State of the Science Implicit Bias Review, reviewing every year for the nation the latest findings on implicit bias. And I encourage you to, that'll be out within the next couple of weeks. I encourage you to go on. It's free. And we want it broadly disseminated, and we also give workshops like these. But I hope you can see that part of the training about implicit bias really needs to spend a little bit of time working with a room of folks like yourself in the way that shows you how our brains operate in ways that surprise even us when we're sitting in our seats. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you.
Yep. Before we take questions, I just want to say I think this is a hugely important issue for us to frame correctly. Because the social psychology of teachers is that we have gone into this profession because we want to nurture young people. And so the idea that somehow we might be doing something which involves prejudice it strikes at the core of who we are as teachers. So it really has to be framed as we're giving teachers tools that will help them be better in the classroom. Not, here is one more, the teacher is responsible for all the social ills of society. So I think as important as this question is, the framing of it is particularly important, because teachers will shut down if this is not framed correctly. Questions? Let me take someone else who's spoken.
Hi, Cheryl Williams, Learning First Alliance, and this is very powerful and very accurate. But my question is, could we not say that this implicit bias, you're not necessarily born with it. It is culturally developed.
It is true that up until a certain age, but from a very early age, we're being socialized about things. We don't realize how powerful those associations are, but to have young children, 4 and 5 years old, be able to do what they do in the doll test, we know a lot of this work is already done by that age.
Right, well,
And so
maybe one of our really altruistic goals is to help to develop a society in which that doesn't happen.
That is sending different messages, and where the meanings that race has are different. Right. Yes, but that's a very challenging goal for us in a society that remains as heavily segregated by race as we do, so that many children don't have interracial real relationships until well into life. I'm a professor at Ohio State. I have students who tell me that their first real exposure and meaningful relationships with people across racial lines was when they came to college. Their neighborhoods were not integrated, and so we get a lot of that socialization about race from other means. And until we can really have more meaningful contact across racial lines, we have to set into place safety nets, safety mechanisms to check us so that we can
absolutely.
be
I
aligned with
I
our...
have a white friend whose daughter is one of 2 white kids in her elementary school class, and
Exactly.
she says she doesn't notice. It's not something she thinks about. So I don't know. Those are anomalies, but anyway.
Well, we do say that we don't notice. It's a brilliant new game. Some of you would have played this as young children. Remember the Guess Who game, where you had somebody across from you and you had pictures, and the object of the game was to know who they chose and to ask a series of questions to eliminate things until you could figure out who they chose. And so you could ask questions like, does the person have a hat? Does the person have facial hair? Remember that game? Well, some scientists redid it by putting in different races, black and white, into that game to see whether or not adult players would ask the question, is your person black? And adults did everything but ask that question, which was the most logical question because you could eliminate half of the people right away. And then they started testing it in the same way on different age groups, and they found that it was somewhere between around 7 7 years of age where people stopped asking the race question. But young people before that asked it right away, so they won the game more quickly than anybody else. But that's how much we avoid and how much we fool ourselves into thinking that race is not an issue for us, when in fact race is heavily associated with all kinds of associative meaning.
Yes.
Is it okay to make 3 quick points and not a question?
yes.
Okay, yeah. First, in terms of what was just raised, I mean, there's a related concept of stereotype priming. Okay, it's a strong social psychology of it. And I think that's part of it, is what people see and what people keep on hearing. There's also, in terms of what Leo raised, there's a really important book that Howard Stevenson from Pennsylvania has just written, and he talks about the real importance for us to develop in schools for everybody racial literacy, so people have the ability to have the conversations that are really important. And then thirdly, as we raise these issues, it's important to know that this doesn't just happen in schools, it happens in child welfare, it happens in juvenile justice, it happens in medicine and things like that, which is not an excuse for not addressing it, but it's to understand the fact that we're dealing with a social illness. And lastly, it's one of what your point, Leo, about the appropriate response of people being concerned. So that's one of the reasons sociologists talk about aversive racism. It's not what we want to see about ourselves, but we live in a society that has a toxicity regarding these issues.
Well, I wanted to say that I'm a teacher in New York City, and I think that this is a way of telling people that we are all influenced consciously or unconsciously by white supremacy and male supremacy in the society. But anybody who's grappled with those issues knows that awareness of that is only a first step. And I think what it underscores for me, and this is something I thought was relevant earlier in the day, is that it's very important to try to have diverse teaching staffs. And it's important to have teachers engaged have the time to engage in common problem solving together. And you're not going to make headway on these issues until race is articulated in the context of teachers coming together and solving problems and working out different perspectives within that setting. And I might add that, of course, the great forgotten agenda in this society now, particularly with the rise of the charter school, is the issue of school integration, and its merits. It's a non-issue nationally now as far as I think our Department of Education is concerned. So I just think it underscores the importance of people having social practice in which perspectives are shared and exchanged and are not confined to workshops.
How you doing? Thank
Hi.
you. Leo, you just made me think of something on your remarks right at the end there, as far as teachers not wanting to believe that, we carry any racial bias with us. So my question is to you, and I appreciate this test, which I'm going to take as soon as I get out of here. But for some of the workshops, to mention again that I do around personal bias in New York City. So we had this one particular borough, I won't mention, where it's overwhelmingly white, right? So the last one, it was 48 out of 51 people there were white. And I found there was a lot of pushback where the white teachers did not want to own any type of racial bias, which was an interesting thing for me to experience, right? So black or brown people say, yeah, we all carry something. But with white teachers, I think it was very difficult, to admit, and I think part of it goes back to what this gentleman said of people not wanting to have the conversation and knowing in our minds the right things to say as teachers. Like you said, like none of us are racist, none of us are sexist. And we get a lot of these comments of, I don't see color, I see all kids the same and different. And I never hear that from any black or brown teachers. But white teachers always want to feel, and some of them were very open with it, of saying that I'm teaching a class of black or brown students and they feel they have to defend that they're not racist or anything, that they're justifying their belonging, they could teach them. So I want to know of anything that specifically speaks in how white people have that conversation around the privilege of whiteness and how, yeah, we all carry it and doesn't make you a bad person, but you have to be aware of it, because my fear is by them denying it exists, just cause them to perpetuate it over and over again.
Right. Yeah, and the important thing to enable that to happen, nobody wants to be called a racist, and we can all totally understand why. It's not a compliment if we mean that the person harbors racial animus or hostility toward another person or is treating them differently because of race. That is not a nice thing to say to anybody. But this is not about that. This is not that at all. And in fact, what implicit bias is about is that we can't live up to our egalitarian commitments, things that are really important to ourselves. We can't live up to treating other people equally and fairly without respect to race if we are unaware that race is automatically triggering certain things that may be a part of our decision making or judgments without our awareness. So just teaching people that this is not an accusation of old-fashioned racism. It is not that. It is an acceptance that race has very powerful meanings, just like gender has very powerful meanings in other categories that we could be talking about as well, and that we need to be on guard against that if we want to live up to our most egalitarian commitments. And so that is the way to do it, but I truly believe that you cannot start a conversation about race ever effectively if you don't go through some of these exercises that diffuses the accusation part of race conversations, because people will be defensive about that kind. It's not a compliment, it's an insult, and it's one of the most serious insults that we could level at each other. So you have to approach it in a particular kind of way for this to be effective.
Hi, Jim Barnhill with Minnesota Board of Teaching. So my question is this. In all of the little tests that we did, we were all using associative thinking, type 1 thinking. And so on day one of a class, I can understand teachers very rapidly using that kind of type 1 thinking. But days into the school, weeks and months into school, I'm afraid of your answer here, but shouldn't you see teachers start to use more type 2 thinking and reduce the amount of bias that's implicit in their thinking or automatic? And shouldn't you see drops in that kind of thinking, and have you measured that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's complicated because, of course, every day, every minute of every day, we are relying on associative thinking of systems 1 and systems 2 thinking at the same time often. And so it's really systems 1 associative thinking that we have to be concerned about in conversations like this. Now, the good news is that some of you may have realized that I use the word unfamiliar black faces that were shown to people and that triggered certain kinds of responses and activity in the human brain. But if we there are other studies that showed familiar black faces that were well thought of, like Colin Powell or Michael Jordan or other popular black persons, and those triggered the opposite. They lowered IAT scores, and those scores tended to be longer lasting as well. And so being very conscious about the images that we have up in our buildings, we don't realize that when people walk into hallowed halls and see a string of old white male pictures, that is doing anything in the human brain that associates white males with success and leadership and all those positive qualities, but that's what the unconscious result of that is. So we have to be very conscious about our environments, but yes, the truth is that the more familiar we are, that can actually reduce some of this. Now, it's not automatic, and we still have to be aware of the realities of implicit bias, but it's one of debiasing techniques. Now, there's a whole section in the State of the Science Review that talks about studies that talk about de-biasing techniques that are also under study. So I didn't have time to go into that, but you will be interested in them.
Okay, I get to play the Grinch again. First I want to thank Sharon, I think, for a very informative